Well, good morning. We'd like to move on to our program. We have the current executive director of the Township Officials of Illinois, my boss, Bryan Smith, is here today to talk about budget planning, township budgeting, and he'll be available at the end of the presentation today to answer questions that you may have for newly elected officials that are new to the budget process. We're hoping you take some notes. The PowerPoint that Bryan's going to go over is on the TOI webpage at toi.org if you'd like to download and print it. We also emailed it to all participants so that you could download and be ready to start today. But with that, I'd like to introduce Bryan Smith, and he's going to share his screen and start with the presentation. Good morning, Bryan.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Jerry, and welcome everyone this morning to this very important, I think, presentation. It's one of the most basic things that all township officials need to be aware of and need to be involved in, and that's the budgeting process. I'm going to do my presentation this morning. As Jerry mentioned, the PowerPoint is available. You can print that out. I would do that and save it because a lot of the information you may refer to in the future. But one thing before I get started, I would like to point out is that the budgeting process is not rocket science. It's very easy. And I hope that my presentation will help you better understand, especially the new folks, how easy the budgeting process is, because it's easy, but it's something you're required to do, and it's something everyone should be involved in. So with that, I'm going to try and get started. Hopefully you can see my screen. Well, the budget and appropriation ordinance, what is it? The budget and appropriation ordinance provides you, the township or the road district or the multi-township assessing district, the legal authority to spend money, and it really establishes your current year's financial plan. Always remember that equipment or any other items cannot be purchased unless they are in the budget. So it is a board and highway commissioner, assessor, everyone's involvement that you have to anticipate all the expenditures that you're going to have during the year. Something you need to be reminded of, all bills, expenditures must be paid from the correct line item in the budget. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Budget procedure. The budget procedure follows the provisions of the Illinois compiled statutes 50 ILCS 330 to 330-5, and this is for both townships and road districts and multi-township assessing districts. For the highway commissioner, you might want to review 605 ILCS 5/6-501. It spells out pretty much the same process that you go through for the township or multi-township budget process. But all your budgets, regardless of which entity it is, must be adopted before or during the first quarter of your fiscal year. So, for example, if your fiscal year begins April the 30th, you must have your budget adopted and in place by the end of that first quarter, which is June the 30th. Now, there are 6 steps that must be followed when you go through and adopt your budget. And I like to use the acronym TINHAF, T-I-N-H-A-F. And I think you'll understand what I'm talking about when I go through these here. First of all, you prepare a tentative, there's the T in TINHAF, tentative combined budget and appropriation ordinance. For the township, that's done by the Township Board of Trustees. That would be the supervisor and the 4 trustees. For the highway commissioner, for the road district, it is by the highway commissioner. You make the tentative budget available for public inspection. There's the I in TINHAF. Inspection at least 30 days before final action on the budget. And that is done by making available by the town clerk. Next, you publish a notice in the newspaper at least 30 days before the public hearing on the budget. There's the N in 10-half. And that again is done by the township clerk. Publication in the paper the newspaper must be published in the township. If you have no newspaper published in the township, excuse me, then the notice must be given by publishing in a county newspaper that has circulation in the township. And of course, this is only when you do not have a newspaper physically published in the township. The notice must state the time and the place where the tentative budget can be inspected, and the time and the place of the public hearing. Then you conduct the hearing, there's the H in 10-half, before the entire Township Board of Trustees. Next, you adopt the budget. There's the A in 10-half. The township budget can be adopted on another day outside of the public hearing day, but it is very specific in the statute that the road district budget must be adopted at the public hearing. Please remember that your budget should not be adopted at the annual town meeting. Your annual town meeting is a meeting of the electors or the voters of the township, and they have no authority to adopt a budget. So it could always be the same day, the same evening. It would just be a separate meeting of the board. But again, the electors should not have involvement, and they will not be adopting the budget at the annual meeting. The Board of Township Trustees can make changes to the road district budget. The law is very clear. It says that they shall adopt the budget or any part thereof they deem necessary. However, I would caution any township board when you go to change a road district budget. Remember, you're not the one that is in charge of the day-to-day operations of the road district. As an elected officer, the highway commissioner should be given the resources to carry out his or her responsibilities for the road district. If budget cuts are made to the road district budget, when you do have plenty of resources available, the township board could face a lawsuit. And that's the same with township assessors. So make sure you're very careful and appropriate when you do decide to make cuts. Within 30 days of adoption of the budget, you file the budget. And of course, there's the F in 10-half. You file the budget and estimated revenues with the county clerk. If you do not do that, the county clerk may refuse to extend your property taxes. So it's very important that it's filed. The budget is certified by the town clerk, and estimated revenues are certified by the township supervisor. Expenditure and revenue projections for the budget. Again, this is where I mentioned at the beginning, it's not rocket science, but if you follow these steps, I think you would find it's very easy. First, you start with last year's actual expenditures. What changes do you think will occur in this current incoming budget year? Trend analysis, determine maybe the percentage rate increase that expenditures have been increasing over the last several years. And I'm looking at like maybe your power bills or things like that, maybe your oil, gasoline, something like that. How much has it been going up over the last few years? Is this a reoccurring expenditure, or is it a one-time expenditure? And a one-time expenditure could be maybe a purchase of a new piece of equipment. Has anything happened that's going to increase or decrease this particular line item? Will the rate of inflation also affect this particular line item? Something you need to consider, is the amount reasonable that you're putting into the budget? What new programs is the township or the road district considering starting in the coming fiscal year? What old programs maybe are you ending? What are the priorities of the township or road district? And that's very important. I think future planning and what priorities are you setting forward? And then revenue projections, are they similar to what has taken place in prior years? So your budget format helps prevent deficits, and we don't like that word deficits. But again, here's a very easy way to explain how you handle the budget process. You start with cash on hand at the beginning of your fiscal year, and let's just say it's $100. You add into that your estimated revenue for the coming fiscal year through your tax levy. Maybe it's personal property replacement tax money. Maybe it's some rental income, but say that's $500, and that total available would then be $600. You would budget expenditures for the year and say it would be $500, and that would equal your estimated cash on hand at the end of your fiscal year of March 31st of $100. So it's fairly simple. Changing the budget. Can this be done? Get this question asked all the time. There are two ways to change the budget after it has been adopted. First of all, the board can transfer between existing line items in the same fund, but you cannot exceed 10% of the amount budgeted for that fund. So for example, if your town fund total bottom line was $100,000 budget in that town fund, you may transfer no more than 10% of that amount, or $10,000 to other line items in that same fund. Second way you can change the budget after it's been adopted is amending the budget. And this is very simple. If you're going to need to transfer more than that 10% that it's allowed between line item transfers, you must amend your budget completely. But you go through the exact same process you did when it was originally adopted, meaning that you prepare a tentative budget, amended budget. It's on file for public inspection for 30 days. A notice is published in the newspaper 30 days before a public hearing. And then you conduct the public hearing and the board adopts the amended budget. A lot of folks are leery about that, but it's very simple. It's the exact same process you went through originally when the budget was adopted. It's basically a 30-day process, and it can be done anytime during your fiscal year, even on the last day of the fiscal year. Regardless of the amount of time spent developing a sound budget, there's going to be changes come about. Changes maybe in your equalized assessed valuation, maybe tax delinquencies, tax objections, maybe changes in your general assistance caseload, equipment breakdown, weather conditions, and unforeseen problems that will occur during the year that are going to require spending adjustments be made to your budget. Again, line item transfers can be made in an amount not to exceed 10% of the amount of that fund. I like to reiterate the example. The town fund is a $100,000 budget. Then the maximum amount of all line item transfers within that fund cannot exceed a total of $10,000. And all transfers should be recorded in the minutes by the clerk. This would be both for the township and the road district. Secondly, don't hesitate to seek a budget amendment if you have exhausted the 10% line item transfer limitation for the fund. The budget is amended, as I said, in the same fashion that it was when it was originally adopted. You propose a tentative amended budget. It's available for public inspection for 30 days, 30-day notice in the newspaper, the budget public hearing on the amended budget, and then the amended budget is adopted and filed. With the exception of the highway commissioner's salary and benefits, the township cannot spend money for road purposes. This is what you have the road district fund for. A transfer of money can only be made from the town fund to the general road and bridge fund if the following occurs. First, the board would need to declare a surplus in the general town fund. Then a written resolution is submitted by the electors at the annual town meeting in April calling for the transfer of the surplus funds. And then the resolution is passed by a majority vote of the electors at the annual meeting. We do have townships throughout the year that do this, and they can do it. But it's at one time a year unless you do call a special town meeting for that purpose, and it is up to the electors. Next, don't transfer money out of one property tax fund to another. Money levied for a particular purpose can only be used for that purpose. So, for example, money levied for insurance can only be used for insurance. Talking about the transfer of surplus money, and I get the question a lot. Folks ask if you could transfer surplus money from the General Assistance Fund. Over the years, some townships have levied and have built up a surplus in that fund. There were a couple of times in the last 20 some years that there was an allowed transfer from the town fund, from the General Assistance Fund to the town fund. However, that has expired. It was a one-year window, and now such a transfer is not proper, so please do not do that. Don't spend money from a fund for a purpose that the law does not allow. For example, money in your permanent road fund can only be used for construction and maintenance of roads. It cannot be used for the purchase of insurance. That's why you have separate levies. You're levying for a specific purpose. Do you salt your finances? S-A-L-T, same as last time. Do you? That is something I would encourage you not to do because things change, and through all the process and everything we just talked about, you do need to make sure that you're looking ahead, look behind, but look ahead, and don't just redo everything the same as you did last year. Purchasing. Let's talk a little bit about purchasing. Don't ignore the proper purchasing procedures for the road district, for road district materials, equipment, construction, or maintenance contract when the cost exceeds $20,000. Please be aware that the bidding threshold is $20,000 for the township and the road district. Make sure that the purchase is authorized in your budget. There again, planning for the future. The highway commissioner should seek assistance in drawing up bid specifications. If he or she finds that it's going to be complicated, they should maybe contact the county engineer and get some assistance in drawing up bid specs. But the specs should not be written to exclude competition. The clerk should advertise for bids at least once in a newspaper published in the township at least 10 days prior to the scheduled bid opening. And then you award the contract to the lowest responsible bidder. That's very important to remember. If you have two bids and one is a little bit higher, you are required to award the contract to the lowest responsible bidder. And the key word is responsible. If you've had prior history with a bidder and say they were awful, did something terrible, you might be able to exclude them, but that's something I would work with your township attorney on before you would actually do that. Don't ignore the proper purchasing procedures for township purchases. As I mentioned, they are very similar to the road district procedures. Don't forget to obtain the permission of the electors at the annual town meeting when you want to dispose of any surplus of equipment. Unless old equipment is used as trade-in on a purchase of a new piece of equipment. But the township and or the road district can now at any time during the year declare something surplus and sell it appropriately without going to the electors. You can still do it at the annual town meeting, but you now do have the option of doing it any time during the year. When you're seeking bids, don't split a contract into several smaller contracts to avoid bidding requirements. That is something that could get you into a lot of trouble. You consider the entire project or purchase and bid it all at one time. Budget management. The adoption of a balanced budget is really only the first step to sound financial management. Once adopted, the budget should be followed closely and adjustments should be made to the budget when necessary and only when necessary. Monthly reports can help the board keep its financial affairs in order. And I can't stress that enough. Township supervisors need to make sure that they are sharing with the board where you stand with your budget each month so the board can properly do its job. The law allows the budget, as I've mentioned, to be adopted anytime during the first 3 months of the fiscal year, but they must adopt it before the end of your fiscal year. Remember, it is your spending plan for the year. Preparing this monthly budget report, really that's a financial speedometer that shows how fast revenues are coming in and going out. You'll show the amount collected or paid out during the month, the total amount collected or paid out since the start of the fiscal year, the amount budgeted for that item, how much remains in that line item, and the percent so far received or spent since the start of the fiscal year. An investment report. This is really a financial fuel gauge that shows the amount of money in your checkbook and your investments. It indicates your cash position for the township or road district. Always show this. Always make sure everyone is aware how much monies are available in your entity. It's so important that everybody knows. Don't misappropriate funds. As I mentioned, the budget is what gives you the authority to spend money. Equipment or other items should not be purchased and cannot really legally be purchased unless they are authorized in the budget. The line items in the budget set the maximum amount that can be spent for those particular items. And payment of bills from the wrong budget line items, it is the Board of Trustees' duty and responsibility to audit all the bills and make sure they're being paid properly from the correct line item and fund. Again, don't spend all of your money in your operating funds, leaving a zero balance at the end of the year. You will have to obviously wait for tax dollars to come in. Most townships and road districts don't get money until midsummer or early fall. So if your fiscal year ends on March 31st, you have zero in the bank, you're not going to be able to operate unless you borrow money. So make sure that you don't have a zero balance at the end of your fiscal year. This may happen if the budget is unbalanced or if property taxes are less than projected. As I mentioned, sufficient money has to be left at the end of the fiscal year to allow for normal spending during the months before your property taxes are available. Here's kind of an example. If the fiscal year begins April 1st, enough cash should be left over from the previous year to meet operating expenses for 5 to 6 months. And that's assuming that your property taxes will be received by August, September, and sometimes they're late. So you want to be very careful with that. Avoid issuing tax anticipation warrants or borrowing money from a bank to meet your operating expenses. Some of you may not know what a tax anticipation warrant is, but that is a formal procedure to borrow money against property taxes that you have not yet received. But tax anticipation warrants must be paid off with interest as soon as your first installment of property taxes are collected. But if future tax revenue is used for current expenses, the township will be digging itself into a deeper financial hole. The budget that is adopted is only valid for the fiscal year that it was adopted for. All appropriations lapse at the end of the fiscal year. Equipment that is budgeted in 1 year but not purchased until the next year must be again included in the current budget. The township or road district does not have lapse period spending authority like state and county governments do. There's no such thing as off budget spending for townships and road districts. As I've indicated, the preparation of the budget is a team effort. State statutes indicate that the Township Board of Trustees shall prepare the tentative budget. However, if the board shows no interest in exercising its responsibility, the supervisor, as chief executive officer of the township, should see that the budget is prepared. Again, don't rush through the preparation of the budget. The budget is a legal document giving you the authority to spend money. Very important. Therefore, equipment or other items cannot be purchased unless they're in the budget. And the budget also sets the maximum amount that can be spent for items. And I think we all agree, we don't want to pattern your spending program after the federal government or the state government for that matter. Except for unusual circumstances, do not spend more money in your operating funds than you receive in current revenues. Expenditures greater than current revenues reduces your cash balance, and you don't want to get into a position where you must issue tax anticipation warrants or borrow money. Again, the budget is valid only for the fiscal year for which it was adopted, and all appropriations lapse at the end of the year. Equipment budgeted on one year but not purchased until the next must be again included in the current fiscal year budget. Real budgets versus inflated budgets. Very often a governing board will adopt a budget that the current expenditures exceed the revenue to be collected during the year. In most cases, all of the authorized expenditures are not actually made, so the financial stability of the township is not threatened. However, such action results in the negative image that the township cannot manage its affairs. And you don't want that. You want to make sure that the taxpayers know you're doing your job. But expenditures are often inflated to cover all possible spending to reduce the need to make line item transfers. Don't do that. You have that ability. You can transfer if needed, and it's part of your financial fiduciary duty as a township official. So don't inflate things just to cover all possibilities. If they come up, then you take care of it. This could result in a meaningless budget if expenditures are unrealistically high. Again, I don't think that is showing your taxpayers you're doing a very good job. The out of balance budget also reflects on the management skills of the township officials, and you don't want that. The budget for the operating fund should be balanced. Current expenses should not be greater than current revenues. If spending is more than revenues, then an operating deficit exists in the budget. Cash on hand for the start of the next year will be reduced, and 2 consecutive years of an operating deficit is a serious financial warning signal. Use last year's actual revenue collections and spending as a guide for preparing the new budget and adjust appropriately for changes. Before approving expenditures to add new services, the township will need to ensure that existing services are adequately funded. The board should not enter into a lease purchase for contract for equipment for a period of time greater than the useful life of the equipment. In considering new or expanded services, the township will need to calculate the impact the service is going to have on your property taxes. Except under unusual circumstances, the township board will not pass a budget that the general fund revenues are less than expenditures. The township supervisor, this is very important, will invest all money within 2 working days, which is not immediately needed for disposal. The township will invest all money only in accordance with the law and be sure that all investments are fully collateralized. It recognizes the rate of return is secondary to safety. I would encourage you to talk to your financial institution to make sure you're covered. All long-term labor contracts, health insurance, vacation, holiday, sick leave, and other fringe benefits will thoroughly be costed out before they're adopted by the board. The township will maintain all physical assets at a level adequate to protect its capital investment and to minimize future maintenance and replacement costs. When preparing the budget, the board will project revenues conservatively and expenditures liberally, but realistically. And that's the key word there, realistically. The board will establish a multi-year capital improvement plan, identifying equipment, land, building improvements that it will purchase and update that plan every year. I think that's only good. It's good planning for the township board. It's good planning for the highway commissioner to look ahead. What are your needs for the future? Not just a year ahead, but 5 to 10 years out. Accumulation of funds. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. You will see here that excess accumulation of funds. Why should you care? Well, there was a law that was passed a few years ago that says you should only have in excess those funds no more than 2 to 2.5 times your average annual expenditures over the last 3 years. And I can show you here a copy of that. It was House Bill 1896, which is now Public Act 100-0474. Township funds, excluding the township's capital fund, shall not exceed an amount equal to or greater than 2.5 times the average annual expenditure of the previous 3 fiscal years. Now, why should you be concerned about that? Well, property owners can file tax rate objections. The statutes allow them to do that. There could be formal lawsuits. There could be objecting to levies on certain funds, and they could ask for a refund with statutory interest because of excess levies and taxes. There are procedural considerations, very time specific for all parties involved. The county is sued, but it is your money that is at issue. And it's important that if you are sued, that you coordinate with your insurance company. So what is excess accumulation? The Illinois Supreme Court ruled in the case Central Illinois Service Company versus Miller in 1969. They explained what that is. You add your fund balance at the beginning of the fiscal year to taxes extended for the prior year to set total funds available for the fiscal year. Then you divide that sum by the average annual expenditure from that fund for the prior 3 fiscal years to determine the accumulation rate. Short-term expenditures and related rate may be related and relevant too. The accumulation rate, how much have you accumulated? In Miller, the court found accumulation rate of 2.84 times the average annual expenditure as illegal. Note that case-by-case analysis, you need to consider that. This is not set in stone, but it is used as a guide. Case law has found lower accumulation rates to be illegal. The 2.84 accumulation rate in the Miller case is not a bright line test. As I mentioned, in 2017, some guidance came with this new law being put into effect. It's found in 60 ILCS 1/85-65. And again, it states that township funds, excluding the capital fund, shall not exceed an amount equal to or greater than 2.5 times the average annual expenditure of the previous 3 fiscal years. However, courts have the power to look at various factors in any tax objection case, even if you are below the 2.5 accumulation rate. So here's an example, and I will mention that the law was also amended this past year. It's at this time, by the time this is held, this program is held, it'll probably be signed by the governor. But there was a bill that said that general assistance funds are included as part of this. As a township, as a road district, you should not be levying money that you don't need. You are not a bank. And I would encourage you, that's why it's so important to look at your budget, look at your levy, make sure you're following through in determining what the future holds. And you should not be levying money just to be doing it. You are not a bank, and you shouldn't be accumulating funds that aren't necessary. But this is just kind of an example here using your general assistance fund. If you had a $500,000 balance at the start of your fiscal year, you receive 50,000 in property taxes, you'd have 550,000 available in your GA fund. The average annual expenditure for the prior 3 years is 155,000 per year. And you divide that average annual expenditures into the funds available, and that's 3.58 accumulation rate. And if you use the Miller case, this rate is clearly excessive and illegal. So go do your math when you get home, or have your CPA or your lawyer help you. Look at your audit reports, tax accumulation reports, et cetera, to find the numbers. Do you have funds with excess accumulation? They may not automatically be an issue in some funds, but it could be. If you do have excess accumulation, lower your tax levy. You may need to consider truth in taxation implications in the future. Maybe spend some of that money on your long-term goals that you were putting off. Or, and here's a big one, establish a capital fund. You can, it is excluded from that accumulation, but let's say you're saving money to build a new building, and it's going to take you 12 years to do so. Well, you're saving money, and by doing so, it's causing you to have excess accumulation. If you establish a capital fund and state in your minutes what you're doing, then that would be excluded by establishing a capital fund for 12 years to save back X amount of dollars to build a new building or purchase a new building. But the board should do that, and it should be involved, and they should be very much involved, and they should make sure that it is stated in the minutes also. You could transfer money from your town fund to another fund. That may be something you want to do in order to relieve some of that excess accumulation in your town fund. In essence, if you do nothing and potentially get sued and you pay interest on a refund is issued to property owners who filed suit. The court would see to that. And a summary judgment is very likely if you're shown to have an excess accumulation. You don't want to get into that situation. Finally, struggle for control of the road district. Everybody gets along with the road commissioner, don't we? Well, quite frankly, it's probably one of the biggest issues we deal with on a daily basis here at TOI. People, boards who can't get along with their highway commissioner, or vice versa, highway commissioner who can't get along with their board. As I've mentioned in talking about the budget process, the Township Board of Trustees may make changes to the road district budget. However, the township needs to remember, the Township Board needs to remember that the control of the road district is not under the jurisdiction of the Board of Trustees, but under the jurisdiction of the Highway Commissioner. And the board should not try to run the road district. That's not what they were elected to do. There is statutory authority for the board to make adjustments to the road district budget, and that comes from a single phrase found in 605 ILCS 5/6-501. It says that the Township Board at the public hearing shall adopt the tentative budget and appropriation ordinance or any part as the Board of Trustees deem necessary. So it's very clear. It's been proven in the courts they can do it. The Highway Commissioner's authority to run the road district and establish policies as he or she sees fit goes on for almost 3 pages in the law. And you can see 605 5/6-201 through 201.20 for all that information. Just some miscellaneous things that you should be aware of. The failure of the supervisor to vote on issues. The township supervisor votes on every issue. This includes the budget. The supervisor votes on every issue. There are 5 voting members on the board, the supervisor and the 4 trustees, and they should all be voting on every issue. The failure of the supervisor to establish a sound accounting system to track revenues and expenditures. The supervisor is the treasurer of all township and road district funds, and he or she needs to be able to track all revenues and expenditures so the board can appropriately audit that. It's very important. Road districts must share a portion of the personal property replacement tax money with any city or village within its boundaries. All townships and road districts receive from the state this PPRT money, usually about 6, 7, 8 checks a year. The townships must also share a portion of their PPRT money with any township library or township cemetery. Township needs to make sure they comply with the Illinois Freedom of Information Act. The intent of this law is to guarantee the right of the general public to inspect and copy any government records. It's all public business, and you should not try to prohibit someone from seeing any township record. Comply with the Open Meetings Act. The intent of the law is that all government actions and deliberations must be conducted openly. Closed or executive meetings are restricted only to unusual certain circumstances, and those circumstances are all spelled out in the law. Just an example of one is if you are dealing with litigation, the board could hold a closed session to discuss how they're going to proceed with that litigation. The clerk is required to keep minutes of all closed meetings, and they are also required to tape record all closed meetings. Don't forget that townships and road districts and multi-township assessing districts have only the authority to do what the law specifically says they can do, not what may be convenient or desired. This is what is commonly referred to as Dillon's rule. Strive for a spirit of cooperation among your township board and the highway commissioner and the assessor. It's so important, and things go so much smoother when folks work together. You don't have to always agree on everything, but do follow the law. Don't lease your personal equipment or property to the road district. This is a conflict of interest. There is an exception for the highway commissioner to have a pecuniary interest in contracts up to a certain amount of money, but the best bet is to stay away from that if all possible. Don't accept premiums or gifts from vendors. And be active in your state and local associations. Be active in TOI. A lot of you have county associations. A lot of your divisions, supervisors, clerks, highway commissioners, trustees, assessors, get involved in those organizations. They provide important information, and they enable you to establish a network of officials who may be having similar problems or situations that you can rely on for further guidance. So with that, I will open it up to any questions.